Alright guys, welcome back for another mind-altering segment of Judavision. If you were looking for cat videos today, I'm afraid you took a wrong turn. This is going to require some critical thinking, and it's going to be more than 45 seconds, so put on your thinking cap. As always, I'm Judah, your host and author of the Amazon best-selling Sacred Scroll of Seven Seals book series. If you've bought this book, I want to thank you right now. And if you're going to buy it in the future or intend to, I want to thank you right now. I see that we have some new subscribers to our channel, so thank you one and all, old and new subscribers to the truth, to Judavision, and I'm beyond excited to share with all of you the culmination of my entire life's work of tracking this bloodline of Knights Templar through time. And for the very first time, we get to watch them work in real time as they execute that final leg of their plot for world domination, which, if you're new to Judavision and are just joining us, we've discovered a crack in the matrix, a rare crack where we can watch them work, through which we've connected the Order of Skull and Bones, the modern evolution of the Knights Templar, to the Mandalay Bay shooting in Vegas, or at least to the property and the design elements, through a mountain of evidence, which was revealed in episodes 1 through 3 of our Vegas Exposed series, only on Judavision. And if you're new to Judavision, you might want to catch up with those episodes. I've created a convenient playlist for you on the channel page, so you can just click on the Vegas Exposed series tab and just start episode number 1 and let it rip right through this episode. And make sure and subscribe, because what we will be releasing from here will be important to humanity as a whole. You have to remember that just to tell this story, I have to talk about the research that led us here. So we're just building that foundation. Things are about to get really, really cool. In our last episode of Judavision, we learned about the ancient art of black mirror scrying, also called peeping, for telling the future, and communicating with the dark side through fallen angels or demons or familiar spirits, whatever you want to call them. And I'm just telling you what these people think. I'm not saying anything beyond that. So these people just stare into these mirrors in order to tell the future. They think they can find deviations or signs, or someone will talk to them or whatever. We also found profound evidence for this witchcraft in a tower at Mandalay Bay, at Delano Tower. And if you look at the top right image on this slide, you can see how they have these black scrying mirrors aimed at this black ceiling, and you see that there's candles lined up next to them. We then learned how these scrying mirrors actually shaped the entire world. In particular, we learned how a low-level street magician, John Dee, used this technique to work his way up to the top of Queen Elizabeth's court as her personal magician, which led to the enslavement of the entire world, consequently, in what John Dee himself coined the British Empire. So he's actually the guy who coined that, and he came up with that whole plot and plan in that little black mirror. He claims angels told him to do it. And the East India Company directors, as mentioned in the last episodes, were the ancestors of the bloodlines who take part in the sinister secret society, the Order of Skull and Bones, on Yale University. And finally, we caught the Pope practicing this witchcraft scrying in downtown Manhattan. We also discovered the identity, believe it or not, in the last episode of the Holy Grail, when you can see it in this picture. It was the breastplate with gold and jewels attached to it of the Hebrew high priest of the Hebrews of the Old Testament. And the Holy Grail, too, believe it or not, we learned was also used for this dark art of scrying. So once again, let's get started on episode number 4 of our Vegas Exposed series, titled Pope Francis, Black Magic Pope. Our episode today will resolve the following. We will identify similarities between Saint Francis, who founded the Franciscan order within the Catholic Church, and the man who took Saint Francis's name, Pope Francis, who, as we learned in E3, episode 3 of Judavision, became the very first Jesuit Pope, or aka Black Pope, to ever rise to sit atop the Roman Catholic throne as Pope. And in this image we can see his Freemason move here, hiding at the hidden hand, hiding his hand. And I thought I'd pop this in here. I found in Proverbs where this actually comes from. And Proverbs was written by King Solomon himself, who these people worship and after whom the Knights Templar named themselves. Templar, temple, Solomon's temple. And Solomon wrote this, and he said, "A slothful man hideth his hand in his bosom, and will not so much as bring it to his mouth again." And as we can see, he is one of these lazy eaters, as they say in their own literature. But so, in other words, we will study how Pope Francis emulates every act of this original Saint Francis guy, the guy who he took his name, who was an obvious pagan, worshiper of nature, which I suppose that's what a pagan is. He was one of the very first conservationists, believe it or not. He was considered a homosexual because the word homosexual didn't yet exist. And he was a skull-toting Jesuit magician who exhibited every marker of the Knights Templar, which is why we're here today. He was nearly an exact match for Pope Francis. So Pope Francis is emulating this guy's every move, the guy that he took his name, and the guy lived about 800 years ago, this Saint Francis guy. And get this original Francis also practiced black mirror scrying. And we'll get into how I know this, but this is pretty interesting because look at this old book, and even on the cover of this book you can see it's called The Mirror of Perfection. And as you can see, the front cover is a mirror. It's a black framed mirror. So here we are. And again, this scrying is a very advanced and powerful form of Solomonic black magic. So from King Solomon himself. And in our next episode, I'm thinking about putting together a show where, without giving all the exact spells and stuff, because obviously I don't read that garbage, but showing you how the mechanism works, because it's very interesting and it ties into the Taco Bell commercial, spoiler, which is used to speak with these so-called fallen angels. Again, they're talking to something on the dark side, they believe, and it's a horrible practice for which we also discovered damnatory evidence at Delano Tower on the property of Mandalay Bay Casino and Hotel, as mentioned, the home of the bloodiest mass American shooting in history to date. 58 people lost their lives in that street, which is why I dedicate my time to this research, because it's important to talk about. So we need to take this witchcraft thing quite serious. For our second objective, we will reveal that the coming of Pope Francis also was predicted 20 years ago on the cover of a Busta Rhymes album, of all places, which is disturbing since two of Busta's other albums are entitled Extinction Level Event 1 and Extinction Level Event 2. And look at here at the top of this wiki page, it says the final world front. Scary. And if you haven't seen my video, Pepsi Threatens Apocalypse, you might want to watch it because it all ties into this pretty closely. And it may appear in this episode as though we are drifting away from the Las Vegas shooting a little bit, which we are not. But it's important to understand the Pope's historic relationship with the Knights Templar in order to understand his role in this final and 10th Crusade, which we are about to partake in. All that said, I'm so excited to decode St. Francis, through which we will in turn decode today's Pope, so-called Pope Francis. So here we go. St. Francis of Assisi, after which so-called Pope Francis was named, was born in the Italian town of Assisi in the late 1100s to the most wealthy family in the region. As the fable goes, Francis's mother went into labor in a palatial room amidst their sprawling estate, but a knock was heard, and a stranger was at the door, who instructed them that this baby was to be born in a manger, like Jesus. Curious. It was noted in many writings that as a boy, Francis was plagued with demonic outbursts and nightmares. Therefore, his childhood was very tumultuous. And as a teen and young man, St. Francis was known as an extreme party chaser, a lover of excess and fine clothes, and he was also known as a famous whoremonger. With the Crusades at a raging boil, like most wealthy noblemen of the times, young Francis, then named Giovanni di Pietro di Bernardone, wished to be a great warrior, a Knights Templar in the Crusades, and in the early 1200s, Francis joined an expedition to Perugia, but was supposedly quickly taken prisoner where he fell ill. And this is where things get extremely strange. It was during this period of illness that young Francis first began to feel like Jesus again. He started to experience these so-called angelic visions in which he began to see flashing lights and spoke with angels, which when we get to our scrying portion of the show, you'll understand that whole flashing light thing and all that. Again, this is a scene which is very reminiscent of scrying experiences, of which I've read in instances such as John Dee, the Scryer to the Stars account, in which Dee became Queen Elizabeth's magician, as we've learned in past Judavision episodes. And it is at this time that I would like to submit one piece of evidence to the court of public opinion to you. I give you Exhibit A, St. Francis's biography, entitled, unbelievably, The Mirror of Perfection is mentioned, in which it states that while in his moments of supposed religious ecstasy, Francis would see these flashing lights and experience ecstasy. In other words, it felt really good. And I don't know if it felt really good when Yeshua was on the cross. This whole mirror of reflection title supposedly comes from a scripture in the Bible book of James, which states this following here. James 1:23 through 25. For if any be a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like unto a man beholding his natural face in a glass. For he beholdeth himself and goeth his way, and straightway forgetteth what manner of man he was. But whoso looketh into the perfect law of liberty, and continueth therein, he being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed. This scripture implies that man should always look to this perfect image of Christ in order to be blessed in his deed, quote unquote, but in no way does it imply that one could physically become Christ, or that one would do so actually by staring into a real mirror. This is the spirit of Antichrist. And St. Francis even went as far as implying that the six-winged seraphim in the image above, angels with whom he spoke while experiencing his so-called religious ecstasy, had pierced his hands and feet, causing him to physically bleed, a supposed phenomenon called stigmata. You don't need a very high level of discernment to understand very clearly that this experience was anti-Christian on so many levels. The Bible explains that no man can become Christ. And not only that, the Bible goes a step further here, in which the real Jesus warns us about such disguised wolves when he stated in Matthew, and Jesus answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. But see that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places. All these are the beginnings of sorrows. From here we will turn to this supposed Saint Francis's dedicated Wikipedia page, where each saint's list of attributes is listed like a Dungeons and Dragons entity card or a Greek god, which in this case lists the following. First, it lists this Tau cross, which evolved into the triple Tau, and then became associated with the Jesuit order, interestingly, 300 years later. So St. Francis was known for this Tau cross 300 years before the Jesuit order was started, and then now look, there's the triple Tau. This H, if you can see, is 3 Taus connected with an intersection. And the Tau cross is associated with St. Anthony of Egypt, which is highly intriguing for 2 reasons. First, St. Francis made a trip to Egypt to supposedly try and convert the Sultan to Christianity. It was Francis's supposed trial by fire, as you can see in this artwork, in which Francis supposedly challenges the king's priest to a hot coal walking contest. But I'd like to point out the obvious here, which is surely that Francis was sent to Egypt for his initiation into their mysteries. It is here that I propose that St. Francis's association with the Tau cross actually originated with that funny looking cross with a loop on top of it in Egypt. Now, I would like to resubmit a book cover which was flashed in a prior episode of the Da Vinci Code. And now we solve the true Da Vinci Code and the programming on its cover. If you'll notice, out of the thousands of symbols displayed on this book cover, only one is distinguishable, and it is the Egyptian Ankh cross. This clue on the cover of the Da Vinci Code book bridges the gap between the Egyptian mysteries of becoming God and the Catholic Church. So through St. Francis. And I know what you're thinking. Just because St. Francis became known for a secular cross, just as did the pharaohs, and he became known for this secular cross after he went to Egypt, proves nothing. But I believe that when St. Francis traveled to Egypt, he was actually entrusted and initiated into the pharaonic rites, so to become pharaoh, which then passed on through the Franciscan order that he created. And believe it or not, he also created an order called the Seraphic Order, which seraphim are very powerful angels called, and seraphim means the burning ones. Doesn't sound very good, and I believe these are the angels that are conjured, the 4 angels that are conjured in Revelation to destroy the earth. So this is very scary. The fact that the ancient stone depictions of pharaohs feature the kings holding this Ankh cross proves this point, but the following evidence drives the nail in the sarcophagus for our new pharaoh, Pope Francis. And now let us again look at the Ankh's Wikipedia page, and I'm going to read this part for you. The origins of the symbol are not known, and I'm sure they go back into ancient Babylon, no question. Although many hypotheses have been proposed, it was used in writing as a trilateral sign, representing a sequence of 3 consonants. The sequence was found in several Egyptian words, including the words meaning mirror, floral bouquet, of which St. Francis was known to, and life. St. Francis is actually known in Tucson, there's a church, and I found this little ad online. You could look for it if you want. But some people were wondering why St. Francis was featured with dead flowers at his feet and a skull instead of the normal birds he's usually pictured with. And you'll know why by the time we get to this. Uh, so he's known for this mirror, this flower. The Ankh is associated with the mirror, phonetically, the flower bouquet, and life. In art, the symbol often appeared as a physical object representing either life or substances such as air or water that are related to it. It was especially commonly held in the hands of deities or being given by them to the pharaoh to represent their power to sustain life and to revive human souls in the afterlife. And if you know anything about the Pope, that's why he has those two gold and silver keys. They cross because he has the same power to grant life and death to anybody on the planet legally. And a lot of people don't know that through contract. It was also used as a decorative motif, one of the most common in ancient Egypt. If you will notice, the wiki page states that the Ankh was used as a trilateral sign, which is very strange if you know the Trilateral Commission's involvement in world union. Next, we read that this word Ankh is closely related to three other Egyptian words, those which represent mirror, flower bouquet, and life. Three items which are associated with, guess who? You win. It's St. Francis again. Again, look at this old book. It says the little flowers, the mirror perfection, and the life of St. Francis. If you're not getting goosebumps, you're not alive. Notice that the cover of this old book includes, again, three elements which are associated with the Egyptian Ankh: a mirror, flower, and life. It is also important to mention that the wind, quote unquote, was very important to St. Francis. Just listen as I read these lyrics of this pagan song, and please don't look it up online. If you do, you're going to find out he is the creepiest dude of all time. And this song that he sings outlines the importance of the wind along with all things alchemical to this little man. And now I will read you the lyrics of Brother Sun and Sister Moon. Sun and moon, brother sun, sister moon. So brother sun, sister moon, brother sun and sister moon, I seldom see you, seldom hear your tune, preoccupied with selfish misery. Brother wind, as you see, and sister air, open my eyes to visions pure and fair, that I may see the glory around me. I am God's creature, of him I am part, I feel his love awakening my heart. Brother sun and sister moon, I now do see you, I can hear your tune, so much in love with all that I survey. Again, sun and moon, open my eyes to visions pure and fair. It is clear from this line that this is about scrying, and I seldom hear your tune. What? I know another nature-loving guy who loved music and spoke to animals, the Greek god Pan. And he was also associated with the sun and moon, and, would you look at this, Pan was the god of the flocks. And he was the Greek embodiment, so birds, and he was the Greek embodiment of Satan, who later the Knights Templar began worshiping in another goat form of Satan, so very similar form, and they called him Baphomet. And so in this Wikipedia page, you can see the form of this goat that the Knights Templar worship. And it's interesting to note that the Knights Templar, after which, or the Knights, King Solomon wrote a book called the Gosha were a play on the etymology of the word goat, in which you could summon 72 demons using these seals and chants, but we won't get into that. But what I'd like to get back to here is the whole flocks or birds portion of Pan's dominion, because Francis too, after he saw the light and began bleeding from his hands like Jesus, ran over to a grouping of birds, as the other onlooking friars thought he'd become stark raving mad. And I can't say that I don't agree with them. As a matter of fact, St. Francis is nearly always pictured with one or more birds for this reason. Pope Francis, however, doesn't seem to have quite the knack for falconry that his predecessor had. For example, in 2015, following the Ukraine incident, where some people lost their lives, Pope Francis released a couple of white doves to supposedly represent peace. But just as these two joyful children released the pair uh, of doves, two birds of differing species swooped in and attacked his doves viciously. So again, not quite the bird guy that Pope Francis was. And the Vatican has since, believe it or not, banned this age-old practice. And notice the blood in the gull's beak on the left. And nevertheless, the Pope clings on to this exaggerated similarity with his namesake, but probably the most important clue to the purpose of this bird-brained Pope's behavior is hidden in the Quran, believe it or not, when it states that King Solomon succeeded David and said, "O people, we have been taught the speech of birds, and we have endowed with all kinds of things. Surely this is a conspicuous favor from Allah." Well, I hate to say this wasn't a conspicuous favor from Allah, and I love people of the Islamic faith. They're some of the best people on this planet. They're great people. They have a great structural hierarchy. They're fun-loving people. They're great people. You have to remember in the Quran that where on multiple occasions King Solomon is told as speaking with birds, it also says that he had command of the jinn, the genies, the demons, and it actually says that he had their help to build King Solomon's temple. And if you've read my books, you realize that some of the greatest stones on this planet are the foundation stones for Solomon's temple. The Quran even goes so far as to say that Solomon used a small bird known as a hoopoe bird in order to spy on his kingdom. And the cute little guy would diligently report back to the king on all matters concerning those in his kingdom. Solomon's famous visit by the Queen of Sheba is even attributed to Solomon's loyal hoopoe bird, when it explains that the bird spied on and later invited the queen to Jerusalem for a rendezvous with the wise king. Which, if true, would mean that an entire book of the Bible, Song of Solomon, would not exist were it not for Solomon's supposed gift of speaking with the birds. Look at this novel in the slide, which shares that Bible book's name, and notice that these book covers are covered again with birds. So there are people that in birds' wings, and there are people that understand this esoteric information that we don't, that has been robbed for us. And again, I've got a dynamite book that I was writing when I went to Vegas, which astonishingly is about all the stuff that I saw there, that I'm going to wind up making shows out of, like I said, if the world keeps turning. And astonishingly, if we look at a passage in the Bible that was written by Solomon himself, we can, to a great degree, know this to be true, the hoopoe story, when he states, "Curse not the king, no, not in thy thought, and curse not the rich in thy bedchamber. For a bird of the air shall carry the voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter." It's from this passage that we get the saying, "A little birdie told me." And again, King Solomon wrote this. And it's about spying on his kingdom with birds. So again, Saint Francis and King Solomon are two of the only men in history who could supposedly speak to these birds in this manner and get them to do what they wanted. King Solomon being the very man after which the Templar modeled themselves, and they even named themselves the Templar, again after Solomon's temple. And since King Solomon too took the pharaonic rites and nearly all of the pantheon of demon gods in Egypt, had bird heads and or wings, same with Babylon, the world is most likely in for a heap of trouble very soon. Since Pope Francis is now emulating every single action of the man from whom he took the name Francis, and it appears that he even took on his demons. And if you've read my books or been paying attention here in Judaism, you realize that this is what they use these skulls for, these bones for spiritual conduit. And so they believe that demons take over their bodies and help them rule the world. And to be honest, I don't know if I can argue with that after having studied them in great detail. And there's more even. Saint Francis, the original Saint Francis 800 years ago, was rich, but left his family and their fortune to act poor and take food from the mouths of the poor. Remember, all Francisco needed to do is go home. His parents were the richest people in Assisi. And he's out pretending as he's a vagrant. This is deception of the highest kind. And there's only so much charity that goes around, which means that the charity that he took up came out of the mouths of the babes, as they call it. In the same way, Pope Francis lives at the palace in which the entire world's art and treasures have been stashed through a lot of really ugly deeds, many by the Knights Templar. But he parades around in a so-called Mr. Bean car. He's opted to live in a modest, so-called modest apartment and chooses not to wear many of the customary clown costumes that many of the popes wear due to his so-called vow of poverty, which is supposedly mandatory for all members of the Order of the Knights Templar. So he's just exhibiting these Knights Templar behaviors. Remember, their full name was the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. The Poor Fellow Soldiers. And the Knights Templar, and again, they pooled their money for world dominion. They weren't really poor. It was a joke. It was a ruse. They were magicians. And the Knights, and I want to show you this slide too before we move on to this. Here's him clowning around in this so-called Mr. Bean car, and that's his humble car as millions of dollars worth of security follows him around. It's an absolute joke. The Knights Templar were burned at the stake for playing with skulls or worshiping skulls, as mentioned. And unbelievably, Saint Francis also played with skulls, and he's featured with a skull in about half of the pictures, and about half of the pictures he's featured with these birds. And Pope Francis, being a member of the Jesuit order, Pope Francis also did the same. And I'm sure he does the same in the dark. Plays with these skulls, prays to these skulls, does rituals, tells the future. Vatican, Vetus, from the Latin word, means telling the future. And just as do the modern Templars, the Order of Skull and Bones on Yale University, whom we've strongly associated now with Mandalay Bay casinos, Delano Tower in particular. And again, in this picture, you can see Delano Tower, and Delano's a strong dope dealing, slave trading East India Company name. And at the bottom, you can see it. This whole property of Mandalay Bay is sandwiched between Russell Road and Delano Tower. And Russells were the ones who started it. William Huntington Russell founded the order. And again, the Tower of Delano, the lobby of Delano Tower is lined with these so-called mirrors of perfection, these scrying mirrors, which are used for speaking with birdmen or fallen angels, which ironically, and look in this slide, birdmen can also be seen in the reflection of these mirrors to date in the Delano Tower. Now look, you can see, this is me taking a photo on this slide here, and you can see that image of the birdmen unbelievably can be seen in these giant scrying mirrors, black scrying mirrors. So Delano Tower's lobby is completely lined with these scrying mirrors, and when you creep around, just to recap, when you creep around to their tower elevator lobby, this is me taking a picture of this final mirror in which you can see disturbingly the elevator lobby in its reflection. Now again, look at the disturbing fortune written in this final mirror, which again reflects the elevator lobby. And the mirror reads, "Don't wait. The timing will never be just right." And this message has Saint Francis's little flowers that you see in his images and stuff sitting right underneath it. You also see that mirror in the bottom left says Delano X design, and the X is the signature to let you know that this was designed by the Knights Templar, and it's coming. Uh, those people were then shot from the top of a tower right in front of this one, from the very same property, Mandalay Bay, in front of a pyramid, just as in the days of the pharaohs, as mentioned. And this article on a so-called gay Christian site upturned some gay facts about St. Francis. Some interesting stuff, like other friars referred to him as mother. St. Francis also encouraged the other friars to be the supposed mothers to each other when in hermitage together. St. Francis also, according to this article, claimed to have experienced an all-female trinity, who in turn saluted Francis as Lady Poverty. So she called him Lady Poverty, a title that he supposedly welcomed. Francis also allowed a woman to join the monastery, whom he quickly changed her name to Brother Jacoba. So you can imagine all of the super creepiness that was going on in here. So it should be no surprise to you that San Francisco was named for this so-called saint, of which Saint Francis of Assisi is its patron saint as well. So Saint Francis of Assisi, or San Francesco, is also the patron saint of San Francisco. Makes sense. Here again, the Knights Templar too were burnt at the stake with their accusations that included homosexuality. And you can see here on this seal that the Templar are riding 2 men per horse. So this is common with the Knights Templar too. They were definitely gay as well. I had to blow past the slide because they were in the wrong order, but similarly, Pope Francis recently stated that gay priests should simply stay celibate, implying that a celibate gay priest would be accepted in the priesthood. Now look, I'm not homophobic. I think anybody should be able to marry anybody. Anybody should be able to live with anybody, love anybody. That's not what I'm saying. But if you're claiming to be a Christian, doesn't go hand in hand, because from the beginning of the Bible to the end of the Bible, these societies were destroyed for homosexuality. And again, I don't judge it. That isn't my job. And again, I think it should be allowed in our society. I don't think they should have any business telling you who to marry. They shouldn't even know which woman you married. These are all things that have creeped up on our society that they have no business about about your life. And there's even a tale about Saint Francis encountering a leper. So a man with leprosy, a diseased man whom he supposedly detested, but after which he dismounted his horse and gave the leper a big smooch on the face, which explains this picture if you've seen it. I want you to focus on this image for a second. Look at the comparison of the 2 Francises on the images oriented to the right of this slide. Uncanny. Clearly, I don't think that Francis is doing this, being compassionate in this image, or what he's doing, being compassionate to the man, is wrong. It's not. I'm simply demonstrating the high level of emulation that is taking place in the photo. He's acting like the original Saint Francis, which is disturbing. And I don't do any date setting on this show, and I don't make any predictions, but It hardly seems a prediction now in light of what we've seen. We're almost sure to see Pope Francis do two things in the near future. And when you see these things, if you're dangling on the edge of believing the things that I'm telling you, hopefully it'll push you over the edge when you see Pope Francis perform a miracle. He's going to probably perform multiple miracles, which will, I believe, will be raising the dead. I think that he will raise the dead. Likely it could even be a celebrity or somebody real close, like a Michael Jackson or somebody everybody loved, or some world unity character, to help bring the world together. But he's going to impress everybody, and the world will wonder after the beast. You wait and see. So there you have it. The Pope, St. Francis, and King Solomon all have exhibited these similar traits. We know that King Solomon begun to fire up the furnaces for human sacrifices again, and this is how he got these 700 wives and 300 concubines, because it's how he met women, because they'd bring their babies from all over the kingdom, and he owned the whole kingdom. He's a world ruler. For their world at the time, which was a lot smaller, and they would bring these babies from all over the kingdom and burn them in his furnaces to these demon gods. And he began doing this, Solomon, after he began exhibiting this bird brain behavior spoken of in the Quran. And at the end of the book, he wrote in the Bible, Song of Solomon, it is confirmed that Solomon was sacrificing those babies alive to the very same sun god as was worshipped in Egypt, when it states the following in Song of Solomon 8:11, King James Version. Solomon had a vineyard at Baal Hamon. He let out the vineyard unto keepers, every one for the fruit thereof was to bring 1,000 pieces of silver. Now, I never really could figure out what the end meant. 1,000 pieces of silver seems like a lot. I suppose it was probably some sort of, he was renting out the property or something. It doesn't matter, but that's not my point in showing this. My point in showing this is I've always wondered why Song of Solomon's was even in the Bible, because it's almost a porno. It's almost pornographic when you read it. But there's two things now that I know. It's a vain piece of work, and if you realize that he's writing this dialogue between this fair maiden and him that aren't married and are having this rendezvous, and they're all excited about it. But when you realize that he's writing this creepy stuff about himself and acting like it's her saying it, about his handsome king and his legs of marble and all this stuff, then it becomes really vain and creepy if you look at through that sort of a lens, which is what it was. And we'll learn that even Jesus called out Solomon's vanity. But there's two things. In the beginning, there's been a lot of debate, and on one of my books on Back Upright, I've had this ongoing discussion with a lady of whether King Solomon or the Hebrews were black or white. They were all different colors, which doesn't matter. If you read my books, you'll see why. But the important thing is the beginning of the book of King Solomon, which he wrote himself again, says that Queen Sheba was black and that he was white. It says it in plain English, which is important to this story. And at the end, here, towards the end, it says Solomon had a vineyard at Baal Hamon. Why is this important? Well, I'll tell you why. At the bottom of this Wikipedia entry, it reads, Greco-Roman sources report that the Carthaginians burned their children alive as offerings to Baal Hamon. Attributes of his Romanized form as an African Saturn, which is where we get the name Satan, indicate that Hamon, known simply as Ammon in Philo's work, was a fertility god. So this is, we're seeing where this passed over on this wiki page, where the sun god is all it is, who demanded human sacrifice, passed over from the Egyptian people, or the Egyptian society, because it was the same people, to the Roman society, and with that they changed his name. So you couldn't figure this puzzle out, and they probably stole your soul with it. Very likely, a lot of people on this planet, they've done that. Now you know why this seemingly random verse was stuck in this book. And it's so we would be able to spot this evil when it flares back up. in our own times. And so we could see it transition through time and be able to recognize this moving beast as he changes his names. Just as it now has in Las Vegas, so it's returned there. But unfortunately, soon they won't be happy with elaborate schemes to disguise their plots in front of casinos, whose themes only reflect their lost gods and rituals. And this long awaited pharaoh of this so called golden age, spoken of in Daniel, the golden head of the statue, will take his throne and light the long dampened fires of yesteryear. But this new king will need help, and for that he will enlist fellow scryers worldwide, which now it appears includes our regional king. Here's Trump scrying with, believe it or not, King or Sultan Solomon of Saudi Arabia. Notice that, like the first released image of the Vegas shooter, Trump's eyes too are closed. And again, this shows that he's a dupe. Look at these guys laughing at him. He thinks he's driving, but he's not. He's not driving the car. So again, this image, this guy that was making a buffoon out of our president is of King Solomon of Saudi Arabia, which is the same identical title of the Sultan when Saint Francis ventured to supposedly convert the king of Egypt to Christianity. And now it appears Donald Trump is mixed up with the same clan, believe it or not, nearly 1,000 years later. And it's probably a good time to mention that this King Solomon guy recently broke all records when he bought the Leonardo da Vinci work titled Salvator Mundi, meaning, you might have seen this on the news, meaning savior of the world. I like to call it Jesus scrying, because as you see in the image, in the bottom right image on this slide, and Jesus himself is holding a crystal ball, which he doesn't need one. And if you read my books, you'll realize he doesn't need one. He created all of this. The man in this image with this X over his chest, this is the true Da Vinci Code. It is a lie. And if you see how shiny this actual painting still is after all these years, the black shininess in the background, I'm betting you a candle has been lit next to this painting, and it itself has been used for scrying. And this oil painting was sold to King Solomon for nearly $500 million. He tried to keep it secret that he bought it, but he couldn't, which makes me wonder how much of the graven images of fallen angels in front of Delano Tower scrying mirrors would sell for in the wake of our impending apocalypse. Oh well, I'm afraid perhaps this is the one spoken of in Revelation, although it's on a cycle. You never know, but it certainly appears as such. But I bet it appeared as such to Christians from now stretching back to when Christ left, at which time his disciples too thought he'd be right back. And he will, in the blink of an eye. Finally, Jesus himself scolded the biblical King Solomon, his fancy clothes, and his precious birds, when Jesus said in Matthew, "No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. Therefore I say unto you, take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat, or what ye shall drink, nor yet for your body, what ye shall put on it. Is not the life more than meat, and the body more than raiment or clothes? Behold, the fowls of the air, so the birds of the air, they sow not, neither do they reap. So they don't plant anything and they don't harvest, nor do they gather that harvest into barns, yet your heavenly Father feedeth them. Are ye not much better than they? Which of you by taking thought can add 1 cubit unto his stature? In other words, can make themselves taller. And why take ye thought for clothes? Consider the lilies of the field. Here we are with the little flowers again. How they grow, they toil not, neither do they spin, so neither do they make clothing or yarn. And yet I say unto you that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Biblical Jesus coming down on the vanity of King Solomon. Wherefore, if God so clothed the grass of the field, which today is, and tomorrow is cast into the oven, shall he not much more clothe ye, O ye of little faith? Trust in God, not in your birds, he's saying. And the Knights Templar were great, excellent falconers and relied on those birds to scavenge for food while on their horrible marches for conquest. So when they would go to siege cities and traveled around the world, and when they were in the form of the Vikings, the same bloodline, same thing. They would take, this is how all the football teams got their names as birds, is to honor what these birds did for man as our race bottlenecked in times of lean. Having a bird on your shoulder was akin to having a refrigerator strapped to your back while going through long expanses. The bird could rise to the air and find creepy crawlies and cracks and rabbits and who knows what. God was just letting people like King Solomon know in this passage, and Saint Francis, and now Pope Francis, that these terrible birds may feed them, but that it is God alone that feeds their wretched old birds. And now, as promised, I will prove to you that the coming of Pope Francis was predicted on a Busta Rhymes album nearly 20 years before he took his throne, before Pope Francis took his throne. In this Pepsi Doritos ad, I proved to you that Pepsi was out to kill you in a previous show. But now look at this slide. As mentioned, the show begins with Morgan Freeman, or the commercial begins with Morgan Freeman, who himself has played God on multiple occasions on television shows and movies, and Peter Dinklage was facing him in a rap battle, and remember Peter in this commercial, and remember Peter is plays in a famous character in a movie about knights who are trying to find thrones. And then remembering that the throne of the Pope was originally St. Peter's position. It's haunting to know that they used a Peter Dinklage in the commercial. But the man to which I wish to charm your attention is this little white bird, or the main feature to which I wish to charm your attention is this little bird sitting just above Busta's head in the image on the left, as Busta too stares into a creepy black mirror. Wow. While wearing a Catholic priest getup. Profound. So here we are, released in 1996. You see Busta Rhymes scrying with a white bird on his head in a priest outfit. So he predicted the coming of Saint Francis. And perhaps even more profound is the fact that when Trump took his first trip out of the country, he met with King Solomon first. Then he met with the Jewish Sanhedrin, and that's when you saw him praying and putting his little folded up prayer with his yarmulke on, and put the folded up prayer into the Wailing Wall. And then Trump brought the Pope a lotus flower sculpture, which is a custom for new pharaohs. New pharaohs would be given a lotus flower. Trump then met with the UN after meeting with the three leaders of the three Abrahamic religions, ending up with the Pope, who he gave a lotus flower, which is customary to give new pharaohs. My friend, a holy war is coming. If they don't succeed this time, they won't give up. And I don't care how high you are in Satan's army. Yeshua is good, and he forgives no matter what your crimes. And though you may not have a mansion when you get there, and all you may have is a trailer with pink flamingos in front of it in a trailer park in heaven, at least you'll be there and you'll have done the right thing. God would have even forgiven King Solomon, who threw countless babies into the fire. I hope you all enjoyed this segment of Judah Vision. This is by no means the entirety of the sickening programming for the coming of Pope Francis. It's just all I have the time and stomach for. And as homework for the next episode in the Vegas Exposed series, I would watch my video, Mother of Prostitutes Explain. And it also might be fun to rewatch Human Sacrifice and Satan's Puppets, which features Busta Rhymes scrying. And always, thanks for joining me for Judah Vision, your bridge to the truth. Subscribe, comment, like, and please buy my books, which will put books in the hands of others who cannot afford it. Thank you for joining Judah Vision. Until next time.